For more on the latest out of the Middle East, Nader Hashemi, Associate Professor of Middle East and Islamic Politics at Georgetown University, is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. So, Mr. Trump went from we could destroy everything to agreeing to a pause. What do you think changed his mind, and will this significantly diffuse the situation?
Well, obviously, it's good news. 2 weeks can pass by very quickly. So let's be clear. Donald Trump's threat to destroy Iranian civilization, which is effectively a threat to commit genocide, is still very much in play. It's only been paused for 2 weeks. So while the entire world at this moment is breathing a sigh of relief, we could be on the precipice of another disaster in 14 days. There's a lot that needs to be negotiated. I think what pushed Donald Trump to declare the ceasefire was that, number one, he was receiving a lot of criticism around the world from close allies, saying that he had to sort of work towards some sort of negotiated settlement. Domestically here in the United States, public opinion is strongly against this war. The economy is hurting. The price of gas has risen over 100% over the last 6 weeks. And so he's very worried about his domestic support base. So that was incentive. As soon as he made the announcement of the ceasefire, the price of gas and the economic markets responded positively. So that gives Trump a little bit of breathing room. Fundamentally, though, I think Trump boxed himself into a corner. He thought Iran was Venezuela. He thought he could end this war in 2 to 3 days and that Iran would surrender. He needs some sort of face-saving formula out of this where he can declare some sort of victory. And it remains unclear whether this moment, this 10-point plan that Iran has proposed and the negotiations that are supposed to take place will give Donald Trump, I think, the type of public relations victory that he desperately seeks.
Professor, a lot to go through, a lot to agree on, as you were saying. But are you surprised that Iran agreed to consider reopening the strait, even if only for the duration of the ceasefire? Because that is Trump's trump card, pardon the pun there. But, can Iran, I suppose, just as quickly close it again?
You're right, they can close it again. And I think what's happened over the last 6 weeks is Iran has realized that, well, it's weaker militarily and it can't match the American and Israeli firepower. What it can do quite successfully is control passage through the Strait of Hormuz. And I don't think Iran is going to give that up easily or willingly unless they get major concessions in return. So the 2-week ceasefire does help Iran reorganize itself, restock and resupply its military capabilities, which have been decimated and hit very hard over the last 2 weeks. It gives some relief to the people of Iran, but fundamentally, on the Iranian side, they don't simply want a ceasefire for 2 weeks that gets extended for another 2 months, because Iran has been down that road before. And I'm referring to the June war of last year, where Iran agreed to a ceasefire, but then nothing really changed. And then it found itself facing this existential crisis. So I think this time around, Iran is going to play very hard at the negotiating table. It's willing to restart the war because it believes that it's in the driver's seat by controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And it's Donald Trump, who's really the desperate one, who needs a way out. So let's hope that there can be some sort of agreement negotiated, because, we cannot, the world is suffering, not just, the people in the region, but, farther abroad. But the devil is going to be in the details to see whether some sort of agreement can be negotiated between the two sides. I'm still skeptical that there can be an agreement given what we know of Donald Trump and given what the Iranian side is demanding.
Okay, so what do you see as the biggest risks that could cause this very fragile, if I could say that, a ceasefire to collapse in the next few days?
Well, there's a saying that, the past is prologue, which means what's happened in the past can tell us what's going to happen in the near future. And if you look at the ceasefires that were negotiated by the United States and Israel in the context of Gaza and in Lebanon, there were ceasefires that were in place, but then they were unilaterally broken by the United States and Israel whenever they felt they wanted to break those ceasefires. So if that's going to be any indication of this current ceasefire, then it could all evaporate. The sigh of relief, this sort of moment of respite that everyone is feeling at this moment, can quickly evaporate, and we could be back to the continuation of this war. So I think that's something to watch for, to see whether there's actually a cessation of military attacks on both sides. I suspect, as the president has mentioned many times, most of the major military targets that the United States and Israel wanted to hit have been struck. Iran's military capabilities have been weakened. And so there's an argument to be made that in and of itself is a victory for the Americans and the Israelis. I don't think it's a victory for the Iranians unless, as I said a moment ago, they can negotiate some sort of broader non-aggression agreement with the United States and Israel that will guarantee that Iran doesn't find itself in another existential crisis that it has been facing over the last 6 weeks.
Professor, speaking of an agreement on non-aggression, I'm wondering, where the Gulf states stand in these discussions. Is it going to be a priority for President Trump? Because you could say that they were the ones in actual danger, the real danger of retaliation from Iran, had the U.S. proceeded, with the attacks on Iran's infrastructure.
Correct. Before the war, they lobbied Trump very heavily not to start this war, not to, violate international law and attack Iran in such a brazen fashion, because they knew they would be the big victims. And so their economies, their reputation, their brand name has deeply been sullied by this war. I mean, just consider for a moment a city or a country like the United Arab Emirates or Qatar. They have a reputation of being a safe place to visit, to invest, to do business, based on this claim that they are stable parts of the world. But with this war, all of that has been upended. Who's going to invest again in any part of the Gulf region unless there can be some sort of guarantee that this won't happen again? So they have a lot to lose. They didn't want this war to happen to begin with, and I suspect they were, heavily lobbying Donald Trump to try and bring this to an end in one way or the other as quickly as possible.
And speaking of global perception and credibility, I wonder, because there has been a growing view that the U.S. is becoming unpredictable, even unhinged in the eyes of allies. I wonder how damaging is that to America's standing globally?
I think it's hugely damaging. I mean, we've sort of seen this rhetoric from Donald Trump right from the beginning in his second term, from Greenland to Gaza to Venezuela to Cuba, and then, now his attack on Iran. And then just in the last 48 hours, his attempt to destroy all of Iran's bridges and energy infrastructure, which under international law is a clear war crime. And then his tweet this morning that the civilization in Iran would be wiped out by the United States under Donald Trump is just, a shocking language that we've never heard from any, world leader, let alone an American leader. So this sort of does not help America's reputation. In fact, it confirms the worst fears that many people around the world have and continue to have of the American president, that he is totally unhinged. He's using this type of bombastic language, which is punishable under international law. And so I think it scares a lot of people, including, allies, friends, and foes alike.
And Professor, given this fall in the standing and credibility of the United States under the Trump administration, I'm wondering if you see the United Nations playing a much bigger role, not just in terms of reopening the strait, which they were talking about, vetoed by China and Russia, but I'm wondering further down the road, a complete ceasefire with the conditions attached, on what Iran can and cannot do vis-a-vis its neighbors and likewise.
Well, look, the United Nations, I think, is only strong as there is a collective political will among its members, especially the members of the UN Security Council, and in particular, those members of the UN Security Council that have a permanent veto. So as we saw today, Russia and China vetoed a resolution to open the Strait of Hormuz. So I think this is one of the problems in terms of the United Nations being a forum that can resolve some of these issues. As long as some countries have a veto and others don't, it's going to be hamstrung and paralyzed. But I still think the United Nations, broadly speaking, has a lot of value. It's a forum that can bring these global issues together, bring different countries together to discuss them. It might not be able to resolve them, but I think sticking very firmly to the rule of law, to international law, reaffirming the principles of the United Nations Charter, which, by the way, Donald Trump has torn up as he started this war, is, I think, an important guide and framework that can shape global conversations over these crises. It's not a coincidence that Donald Trump has tried to jettison and forget and move beyond the United Nations by creating this Board of Peace that is very much structured as an alternative to the United Nations, where he is effectively the chairperson and the chief executive officer for life, and he gets to appoint permanent members based on his own free will. That suggests that Donald Trump is not someone who is interested in the United Nations, and I think it poses, a huge challenge to basic principles of global order that are very front and center of global politics at this moment.
Okay. And Professor, the ceasefire comes after a mediation and also the pressure from China and Pakistan. What does that tell us about the new diplomatic players in the Middle East?
Well, it tells us that, Pakistan obviously has played a key role here. I think because of the nature of this conflict, you have to have an intermediator that is respected and has good relations with both sides. And so Pakistan has good relations with Iran. And of course, the current government has very good relations with Donald Trump. So they really, to my surprise, I didn't think they could pull this off, played an important mediating role at this critical moment. Full marks to the Pakistanis for pulling us back from the brink of what looked like an impending disaster. So I think we have something to learn here from the ability of the Pakistani diplomatic corps to step in and play an important role. Whether they can continue to play that role, I think that remains to be seen. But I think fundamentally, Pakistan was able to play a mediating role because I think the two sides fundamentally agreed that a 2-week ceasefire was in their best short-term interests. What happens after 2 weeks is unknown. And it's going to take a lot of diplomacy, not just from the Pakistanis, but I think from other countries that have good relations with both the United States and Iran. I'm thinking of Turkey in particular. China and Russia here are potential mediators because they have good relations with both sides as well. But I think the Chinese and the Russians do not want to get involved in mediation because from the perspective of global power politics, they're benefiting from seeing the United States under Donald Trump get bogged down into a Middle Eastern war, once again wasting resources and having America's global reputation impugned in this way. So I don't see Russia and China stepping in to provide the type of mediation that a conflict like this certainly needs.
Understood, Professor. We leave it there for now. We thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. Nader Hashemi is Associate Professor of Middle East and Islamic Politics at Georgetown University.